Nigeria is Africa's largest oil exporter with the largest natural gas reserves. Other export commodities are cocoa and rubber. The country's economic growth is mainly driven by strong performance in the agricultural trade, telecommunications, manufacturing, and the film industries. The country is also the continent's largest economy, but has struggled to increase its exports, which would in turn increase the country's earnings and foreign reserves. Nigeria's balance of trade report for the third quarter of 2021 has been released by the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics. It shows a foreign trade deficit of 3 trillion naira. From the report, Nigeria's imports hit 8.2 trillion naira against imports of 5.1 trillion in the period under review. Nigeria's main export trade is dominated by crude oil, which amounted to 4 trillion naira. That's around 78.47% of total exports in Q3. This was followed by natural gas, liquefied with 9.5%, floating of submersible drilling platforms at 3.19%, and urea at 2.08%. On the flip side, imports were mainly motor spirits, wheat, gas oil, and used vehicles. Today, we'll be looking at Nigeria's 3 trillion naira trade deficit. I'm Tolulope Adelaru Balogun. Welcome. This is Business Edge. Joining me is Gbolahan Olojade. He's the Executive Director of DMA Advisory and Management Services Limited. Gbolahan, it's good to see you again. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning to you.
Nice to be here.
So let's go back in terms of what we've seen with trends. Now, Nigeria's trade deficits, and this latest one now, comes on the back of recurrent trade deficits recorded in previous periods. That is 2.25 trillion naira in the first half of 2020 and 5.12 trillion in the second half of 2020 as well. But this is the highest trade deficit that Nigeria has ever recorded, probably again exacerbated by the continuing effects of COVID-19. Does any of this come as a surprise to you that Nigeria is experiencing at least a 3 trillion naira trade deficit?
No, there are no surprises about that. It might actually get fatter in the fourth quarter because most likely a lot of merchandise importation will be consummated in December towards the end of the year. So a lot of items are being imported as we speak. Then if what NMPC has been saying is something to rely on, it means that our consumption as well of premium motor spirits seems to have been growing. There might be an attempt to bring in a lot of premium motor spirits in the fourth quarter. So in the fourth quarter, it might actually be bigger. There's a possibility that it's bigger.
All right.
It's not really surprising if you ask me.
For a country as large as Nigeria, we often talk about the markets that Nigeria has, 100, 150, 180, 200 million, depending on who you talk to. It would surprise many people that Nigeria is bringing in so much without producing so much locally for its market. Why has the country become such an import-dependent country, even as the largest economy on the continent?
Yeah, you answer the question as part of your comment. It is the poor production level in Nigeria. Let me take that in two layers. Agricultural product, or let me say primary product. So we have primary products, one of which is agricultural product. We have solid minerals, we have oil and gas as well. In the agriculture space, as insecurity continued to get into that place, chasing away farmers from their farms and all that stuff, there's going to be a bit of decline in that place. The other part, which is solid mineral, that space has not really been properly structured in the country. There are a lot of solid minerals in Nigeria, but it would be nice to see how much does the country make from solid minerals. It's negligible, as if it doesn't exist. Meanwhile, there are already environmental problems being created by solid mineral activities in some states in Nigeria, but we are not seeing that in the revenue of the country. Then the oil and gas part, which is the majority of what we are able to offer the world as export, is crude oil. And our crude oil has ranged from, almost 70% to above 80% of the entire export that we have. So when we're not doing oil, what do we have? Nigeria is not productive. So if you leave the primary product and you start to talk about value-added products, the production base, the industrial base is very poor. So insecurity will add to it because some of the materials that are supposed to be local materials cannot be sourced, or when they are sourced, cannot be moved. The other part is power. Power is still not there. So how do you build an industrial base if power is a constraint? We have the port problems because some of the raw materials are actually imported. But there are also problems, crises at the port. So we're not a productive nation that much. So if we're not producing, what are you going to offer the rest of the world? That is a fundamental question.
And that's a question we hopefully will have some kind of answer to in terms of addressing those barriers. But let's also look at this in terms of the economy. What impact does this high trade deficit have on Nigeria's economy, and in particular, the value of the Naira, especially given that we're having to exchange so much Naira to foreign currency in order to be able to import the things that we lack?
The impact is directly on the exchange rate because we are importing much more than we are exporting. So we are not earning as much dollars as we're spending. So in the last quarter, for example, export of 5.1 trillion Naira, while the import was over 8 trillion. So, which is what created the 3.3 that we're talking about anyway. So we're not earning as much. So the impact is directly on exchange rates of the Naira. And it is the most fundamental determinant of the exchange rate of the Naira. What we are able to offer the world to earn FX vis-a-vis what we are buying from the world. So when you think of a nation like ours, apart from not producing, we don't have a penchant for consuming imported goods, imported education, imported healthcare. It's been in the healthcare space for several years. The Nigerians spend over $1 billion on healthcare for consuming foreign healthcare every year, annually, or what you call healthcare tourism. So when we continue to do that, we impact our exchange rate. So on both sides of the divide, produce more. In fact, that is the best thing. Then on a lighter mood, see how we can cut down on the importation via some import substitution, some local campaign to consume Nigerian things. Hopefully Nigerian things will be up to the standard that the people want. Those are some other campaigns that we can have on the other side. But on the production side, which is where the main work is, we're not yet doing that, and that is impacting the value of the Naira.
So let me refer to Nigeria's Statistician General and the head of the NBS, and he pointed out that the negative trade balance was mainly due to an increase in imports of refined petroleum products, as you've pointed out as well, and also imported motorcycles and cycles and cars. Particularly for this importation of used vehicles, what conclusions can you reach as to the things that Nigeria is importing the most in terms of the PMS? As we're saying, we have national refineries that are still not yet up and producing. We're also importing used vehicles, but there's also an automobile master plan that has or should have been in play for a number of years now. So what is the things that Nigeria is importing? What are they telling us about what Nigerians want, and as well as about the state of the economy?
Okay, I'll give a very good from an observation of mine. If you see a Tata car in Lagos, look at the occupant. Most likely is an Indian man. And that is because Tata cars are manufactured by an Indian company. So that is a man who, even when he is out of his country, is still consuming something that is made in his country. I love the Indians particularly for that. I have an Indian colleague who, when he came around to Nigeria, decided I wanted to stay in an Indian hotel. He stayed in an Indian hotel. When we needed some IT people and we were trying to recruit, he told me he will get us CVs from India. That would be easier to get high-tech people from India. And he did that. When he traveled and came back from India, he brought brandy from India and offered brandy from India for consumption. That is the mentality that the Nigerian does not have. Now, there are car manufacturing companies in Nigeria as we speak today. We're not quite where we ought to be, but I believe that the patronage that these manufacturers are getting could be better. It is true that the patronage has increased over time because even government, to a certain level now, has started to patronize some of these local manufacturers. Innocent is a very good example. So I've started to see certain MDAs that are purchasing cars from this. But we can make it bigger. We can make it better. Living in the United States, I live in Texas. I can still mentally picture the police vehicles in Houston. I don't remember them using Toyotas. They are typically American cars, a GM or a Ford. That is what dominates the vehicles that the law enforcement agents use in the state of Texas. When are we going to get to that point? When government will lead from the front in terms of consuming that which is Nigerian. So imagine that when we are buying public sector vehicles, show military cars, police, National Assembly, MDAs, that a chunk of this is going to manufacturers that are already in Nigeria. What that does is that it helps them to scale up both in quality and quantity and pricing of what they are producing. But we're not quite there. Let me admit that we have moved from where we used to be, but there is a gap. There's a huge gap that we need to fill up.
All right, and there's
these vehicles that we're bringing.
Yes. Okay. Bola, just hold on. There's history there. I'm happy you said we're not quite there, but we've moved from where we used to be. And if you go down in history, at a point in time, it was agricultural produce that Nigeria was exporting the most and making a lot of money from that. And we'll get into that after this break. Even though Nigeria recorded a trade deficit of 3.023 trillion naira with her trading partners worldwide in the third quarter of 2021, even as total merchandise trade stood at 13.284 trillion naira during the period. What was Nigeria exporting? And of course, how can the country work on its deficit? The conversation continues on Business Edge after this. Still with me is Gbolahan Olojede, Executive Director of DMA Advisory and Management Services Limited. Now, one of the key issues has been around the issue of the value chain and the value of what is exported. When you expand this to include the entire continent, the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area says that Africa's share of global trade remains low at 2%. And it is unlikely that the continent would record meaningful growth if it remains overly dependent on exporting raw commodities. People are barely adding value along the value chain. So let me bring Gbolahan back in here. When you look at this example, even in terms of the UK recently had some sort of export trade partner conference, and it said that 13 countries out of 54 countries on the African continent had some kind of surplus with the UK. But what you found out is that their surplus is in raw materials, not in finished products, not in finished goods. And that means that we're getting the minimum, the lowest amount of value for the things that are coming out of the continent. So when it comes to the value chain aspect of this trade conversation, what does Nigeria need to do?
Well, Nigeria, we need to look at our industrial sector and ask ourselves, what are the limitations, and begin to address it. Africa has not largely moved away from the colonial era where we were seen as a source of raw materials. In fact, the infrastructure that were created in Africa in the colonial days were created along the pattern of exploiting Africa for raw materials. So you see those rails from Enugu, rail to Kano, so that they can bring cotton and granite, Enugu for coal, Jos for tin. And this is how those infrastructure were created. And Africa was just that place where you can get all the raw materials you need and ship it abroad and develop all those places. In certain instances, or in most instances, some of the products that are produced abroad are now brought back. A very good example is our crude oil. So till today, Nigeria exports crude oil, then turns around, he earns some dollars by exporting it, turns around and use that money to buy refined PMS and bring it into the country. The whole game is lost. So we must begin to ask ourselves, as Nigeria, why can't I refine my fuel? As an example, it might be said, though, that in that fuel refining space, with the Dangote refinery, maybe we are on the verge of handling that particular instance. But refining fuel is just one. There are several other areas in which we can add value. We will export our cocoa to maybe the Netherlands, and then we'll buy chocolates to come and fund, to come and as raw material for some of our companies here at our backyard. The same thing goes for several primary products that are produced in Nigeria. We produce primary products, we sell them, or they will say cheape on the street, you know. And then we go out there, we buy it at more than 4 or 5 times of what we sold. We are exporting jobs out of this country. We are damaging our foreign exchange, and that has been the history. So let's begin to address those issues that are militating against the industrial sector of Nigeria. From issues about ports that are not good enough, port operations are not particularly interesting.
Seamless,
From
yes.
infrastructure deficit, I must mention that one of the major uncaptured component of our inflation is actually the cost we bear for poor infrastructure. When you get on some of Nigerian roads, you'll be amazed at what is there. It is so sad that sometimes it's better to just import than to try and get. I would rather import certain raw materials from maybe even Asia than bring it from Kano or Sokoto, because where is the road? You know, so the infrastructure cost that we are bearing alone is huge. So we must address infrastructure issues as well. And one of those key infrastructure is also power. Address power, address transport infrastructure, look at the ports and what is going on there, look at your tax regime. So in terms of policies to encourage businesses, we must also look at all of that and ensure that we can translate from this pedestrian, rudimentary kind of economy that relies on primary products into more of a value-add system. That is part of what will drive revenue in this country. Our revenue is extremely poor.
And I want to point this out. So comparing the third quarter to the second quarter of 2022, total trade grew by 10.43%. from 12.02 billion naira, and export trade grew by 1% from about 5.79 billion naira. So some people would say, why should we be focusing on the 3 trillion naira deficit that was experienced when we've seen some increases? What do you say to that? What's even accounting for some of this increase we've seen other than crude oil? I don't want you to mention crude oil again. What are we seeing the increase for, and should we focus on the positive or the negative?
Well, let me quickly mention that as far as the Q3 is concerned, we had a lot of importation of machinery and transport equipment, and that is a good thing because it shows that there are probably some expected activities in the industrial sector and in transportation. Transportation is very critical. That is part of the infrastructure issues that we are talking about. So that is a good part. But you see, for direct comparison of the fact that, there was a growth over the last quarter, there was a growth in trade, maybe the deficit should take a back step. No, it is important for us to analyze what is going on. Because if you're importing more than you are exporting, which is what the deficit is telling us, the deficit has grown. That has an impact for our exchange rates. And it is sending us a very clear message. And that clear message is the need for us to produce more. We're not even doing enough, even with Africa. not to talk of offering things to the world, which is why largely, in my opinion, it's as if ACTA has not taken off or has so far been a non-productive trade agreement as far as Nigeria is concerned. How has it impacted what Nigeria has to offer to the rest of Africa? I'm yet to see that. So it is important not to just focus on the fact that trade has grown. Trade will grow as we have moved. We have seen from 2020, activities has continued to increase in the economy. In fact, trade will grow further, like I said, in Q4. But
Yes.
it's not just about growth in trade. We have to now decompose it into the import and the export, and
Yes.
the deficit should matter to us.
All right, Bola Olejide, thank you so much. We'll be looking to see what the numbers say in the Q4 reports, but you are already anticipating that there will be an increase in the deficit as well as an increase in the trade movement as well. We'll touch base with you again. Thank you so much for joining me.
The pleasure is mine.
And the history of Nigeria has not been like this. The country has been experiencing trade deficits since the collapse of the commodity boards back in 1986. Every effort to correct this situation has remained a mirage. Successive regimes have set up more than 10 agencies, including the Standards Organization of Nigeria, the National Food and Drug Administration Commission, the Raw Materials Research and Development Council, and even the Nigeria Export Promotion Council. And at the end, nothing has really changed. Is Nigeria, the giant of Africa, the largest economy, ready to go into another decade where non-oil exports take a backseat to crude oil? It's a question that the Nigerian government will have to answer. Up next is NC4 to watch. And we start in Zimbabwe, where the central bank governor has said that the nation will maintain its main policy rate at 60%, citing macroeconomic stability. Although year-on-year inflation has come down from more than 800% in July of last year, it remains above 50%, which has forced the central bank to keep rates higher. South Africa's economic growth forecast of 5.1% for 2021 is at risk after more than 90 nations imposed travel bans on the country right before its summer holiday season because of the discovery of the coronavirus Omicron variant. The Nigeria Civil Aviation Authority says international airlines will pay $3,500 as fine for each passenger flown into the country not complying with the Nigerian newly revised COVID-19 provisional quarantine protocol. The NCAA said non-compliance with the protocol requirements could also lead to an outright ban on the non-compliant airline. And finally, Equinix, the world's digital infrastructure company, has announced that it is acquiring Main One, a West African data center and connectivity solutions provider with presence in Nigeria, Ghana, and the Ivory Coast. The deal, worth about $320 million, is scheduled to conclude in the first quarter of 2022, pending the fulfillment of customary closing conditions, including the requisite regulatory approvals. And that's Business Edge. Follow us on social media at News Central TV. Download our mobile app and, of course, watch us where we are. We're live on Star Times. We're also streaming on apps from not just here on the continent, but also outside of Africa. I'm Tolu Lokwe. Adilaru Balogun. Have a pleasant day.